Hey, we're finally back with another video. Yeah, I've been on a bit of a break this past month for a couple reasons, you know. Tried out the Division 2 actually, the new update, but still wasn't really feeling that game. And besides Trials, Destiny 2 is also going through a somewhat slower period right now. So, as a change of pace, I kind of wanted to go back to some of the games that I played as a kid. Just to relax a bit, just to take a break from it all. And what is a better game to go back to than Rayman? Now, this isn't going to be one of those videos where I pretend that the Rayman games were perfect and just talk through the rose-tinted glasses of nostalgia. But especially Rayman 2 will always be at least a bit special to me because it was the first game that I ever played and also the first game that I ever beat. And as a result, I've got plenty of memories from it. I still remember how at the age of 4 my dad bought Rayman 2 for the PC as a gift. And immediately it was a train wreck. I had never used a PC before, let alone play such a complicated game. So I actually could not make the first jump in the tutorial level. The arrow keys were no problem to use, but I just couldn't get the spacebar timing right with enough momentum to make the jump across. My dad would also never played a video game before, and to this day still moves the mouse around like this. He also couldn't figure out the jump and eventually concluded that the game was broken. And that was it. We never made it past this jump and I always kept wondering what would be on the other side of this river. But then, when I was 5 years old, my dad actually bought me a PlayStation 1 with the same game again. Don't ask me what the logic was behind that, but now I got Rayman 2 on the PlayStation 1. And I think that as a kid it's much easier to use a controller than a mouse and keyboard, at least it was in my case. So as a result, after just a few tries, I made the jump and beat the tutorial level. And I remember just how happy I was about that. Now, I would finally get to figure out how the game ended. Because yeah, back then I thought that this jump over the lake was pretty much the final part of the game. And I finally did it, I finally beat the game, and what a surprise it was then when I got sent to the overworld and I could jump into the next level, which was so much longer and more difficult than the first one, with deadly water, enemies to kill, multiple loading screens for a single level. You know, there's more challenges, there's new mechanics, and we have to free up this Lee the fairy from their imprisonment. It took me a while to beat this level, probably weeks. Simply because of the size and the increase in difficulty. And after beating it, I was super surprised again that the game still wasn't over. That's weird to think about, right? But the only reference that I had back then as a kid were games like Tetris or Pac-Man that I played on, I don't know, the Game Boy or something? I don't even know what it's called anymore. And those were usually just single levels that got harder and harder or just got faster and faster. I hadn't played any other games before, so little did I know that Rayman 2 had 17 levels, and it's not even counting all the bonus levels. I spent months trying to beat this game. I still remember thinking that the Guardian of the First Mask was the final boss. Again, that's what I thought. I thought that that was the ending. And I still remember it not being the ending and me being surprised that the game was even longer. And then I remember my dad searching on the internet how to deal with the robot dogs that just kept charging at me in the next level. I remember getting stuck on the Cave of Bad Dreams because for the first time ever, to progress, I had to go back a level and play the previous level. But I didn't really follow the story. Can you really blame me? I was 5. So I kept playing the Cave of Bad Dreams over and over and over again, thinking that I must have missed something. We actually ended up calling the neighbors, who had the game as well, also on the PlayStation 1, to ask them how they beat the level. And it turns out that they had been stuck on that same part for weeks as well, and had already given up on it, pretty much. They were already playing another game. I found the solution by sheer luck, as I replayed the previous levels for fun, and I suddenly got a new cutscene. I never told the neighbors though. That's what you get for giving up. I remember going into the Sanctuary of Stone and Lava and hating the plum mechanics, never wanting to replay that level again because of how long and how difficult it was for me to beat. And then also getting super sweaty when I had to play through another level filled with lava and another one just a little bit later into the game. I also remember being super disappointed when I finally found the fourth mask, which would give me maximum energy. And then when I played the next level, nothing changed. No more health, no more crazy attacks, nothing. I just finally got to the final level and got to beat the final boss. And by that time I was so good at the game that it felt like a breeze. I beat it on my second try, so the ending was quite anticlimactic, but I probably have about as much memories from my first Rayman 2 playthrough as that I have of everything else from my life from around that age. Now, going back to that game 20 years later, it's funny to see how your memory works, because, you know, there's a lot of things you remember, a lot of good things, but not a lot of bad things. And of all the things that I did remember, the one thing I forgot is how to move around. It took me quite a while to figure out that on the PlayStation 1, to control Rayman, you have to use the arrow keys instead of the joystick, which is quite clunky. I guess back then they hadn't figured out that the joystick could also have a purpose in games. And also, I did not remember this frog to be this annoying. I'm not saving you this playthrough. I also noticed how simple and how one-dimensional the combat is in Rayman 2. All you have to do is strafe left and right while spamming attack to win pretty much every engagement in the game. Most of the robot pirates don't move and just shoot easy to dodge attacks. And I think that the developers knew that the combat wasn't the best about the game, because throughout the whole game you only fight 26 pirates. Yeah, I went back through the footage and counted them all, and it's only 26, and that's including the 4 ninja mini-bosses and the 3 big ones in this circular crate thing. If we take those out, you're only fighting 19 pirates, some of which you can just run past as well. And the crazy part is that I never noticed this when I was younger. I was totally into the narrative of this huge pirate army that is enslaving the whole world. And I never noticed how little you actually see them in the game. I think a big part of that comes from the world building that the game does. I think it does that really well for its time. This game is surprisingly dark. It definitely seems cheesy at times due to its older age. You know, some of the animations look pretty choppy too. But it's also quite dark thematically speaking, with enslavement and genocide as its main theme. And although there isn't much pirates that you have to fight and kill, almost every level does have some sort of pirate structure or interaction or some mechanic that you have to do with the pirates. You might be infiltrating a prison, you're not directly fighting pirates, but you are taking down this big pirate machine. There's a lot of stuff in the levels that make them feel more populated than that they actually are. And if there isn't any pirate related stuff, that's because you're in one of the 4 sanctuaries to find one of the 4 masks. That's the whole story. You kind of have to collect these 4 masks and then you can save the world, basically. Now, the level design and the world building are definitely this game's strongest points. Literally, every level after the second one has a unique mechanic to it that you have to learn and sort of master to advance, and it's oftentimes not copy and pasted into the next level. So what that does is that it makes every level feel unique. The third level has you water skiing over a swamp. The 5th level has these air bubbles that you have to collect, and you have to scare away the fishes so they don't steal your bubbles. Then you have this robot dog thing, which you have to exhaust to tame it and then jump on top of it so you can ride it and cross the rain. The Cave of Bad Dreams has ball throwing, which I still suck at. Then in the level where you have to free Glowbox himself has some weird rain dance that is magically the solution to every problem that you encounter. Then we have the lava with the plump that you have to jump on top of to stay above the lava. We have the lava level with the infinite helicopter. We have a couple of chase scenes. We have this level where you can fly with barrels. There's also this level, which is not that much fun. They kind of rushed it towards the end, I feel, but you can see my point. Every level has a major mechanic that up until that point in the game you haven't really seen or dealt with before. And I think in combination with the tone that the overall game has, you know how dark it is and that you have to find these masks in these obscure and mysterious places where no man has ever gone. I think that's what makes this game so memorable to me. The single biggest critique that I would have of Rayman 2 is simply how easy the game actually is. And it's funny that I say that when I had so much trouble with it as a kid, but for anyone over the age of, I want to say 8, this game will be a breeze. As you progress through the game, you will find more and more of these cages with, animals and things trapped in them because the pirates captured them. And every time you set one of them free, they give you a little bit of bonus total health. But every time they do this, they also fill up your whole health bar. So, every level has quite a few of these cages, which means that it doesn't really matter if you take some damage. As long as you find a cage and open it, your health is instantly refilled to the max. And these cages are sometimes not even 20 or 30 meters apart. It's really easy to find cages in these levels. They are basically all over the place. The game also throws a lot of these red lumps at you, which regenerate some health. And also the yellow lumps, which you have to collect in order to save the world, are in the most of obvious places. And on top of that, even if you die with all these things, it will most likely not set you back too far. It will not reset the whole level. It will just set you back to the previous checkpoint. So no matter what you do, as long as you can figure out what to do, failure seems almost impossible. Except if you don't know how to use the spacebar. I think the game being so easy was a response to the first Rayman game, which came out 4 years prior to it, and it was the exact opposite. Rayman 1 is still, to this day, the most difficult platformer, maybe the most difficult game that I've ever played. The most difficult single-player game, because, multiplayer games can get as difficult as the opponents get. The game starts off a little slow, but compared to Rayman 2, the first level is already pretty difficult. Water is deadly. There are enemies, there are flying projectiles, and then the second level already has you play versus the first boss, which is this mosquito, which you also have to ride in a high-speed screen scroll section right after you defeat him. Now, this is not something that I did on the first try, especially not back when I played this game for the first time at the age of 6, but really, it's not too bad up until this point. Nothing, however, can prepare you or any player for what comes next. You see, after beating this level, the overworld gives you two options. You can complete a few more levels in the forest area, which is what most people will typically do, or you can move on to the next area called Bongo Hills. As a kid, I chose Bongo Hills. 2 hours later, I quit that game for at least a couple of weeks and I didn't want to play it again. Not only is Bongo Hills one of the longest levels in the entire game, which they put pretty much at the start of the game, it also introduces these slippery platforms, clouds that disappear underneath you, and these enemies which I never quite knew how to deal with. I guess they mirror your movement, so you have to shoot your fist and then jump, and then they have to land, and then on the return point of your fist you have to hit them. I don't know, I could never really figure it out as a kid. And I really just hated this level. The jump in difficulty was so severe, it is just unreal. You go from a nice little platformer to one of the most hardcore things that I've ever played. And I remember that when I came back to it, determined to beat just that one level, I was so happy when I finally did. And from that moment on, from that level on, it didn't really get easier. And Rayman 1 wasn't about fun for me. Every level that I played in this game felt like a struggle. And what I would actually do after every level is I would replay the easier levels in the forest area to collect those blue orbs, because every time you get 100 of these orbs, you would get an extra life. And these lives were important because, unlike in Rayman 2, in Rayman 1 you only have a limited amount of lives, and once your lives run out, you have to go back to your previous save spot. And since you can only save from the overworld, this means that if you're doing a new level and you run out of lives, you have to basically start that level all the way from the beginning. This was a pretty big deal. Why? Well, because every level was so damn hard. So every time you beat a level, you came back into the overworld with maybe 1 or 2 lives remaining, and then of course you saved because you finally beat the level, but then if you wanted to beat the next level, you were surely going to need at least 20 lives. So what you would do is you would farm the easier levels over and over and over again. I don't know if the developers wanted you to do this. It artificially made the game a lot longer for me. It's not something I enjoyed doing, but I just really wanted to beat this game. So it's something that I was forced to do. And the next part that I truly got stuck on was Picture City, which is a level much later into the game. which is just, this is just where the game gets ridiculous. Just look at it.
Yeah, it looked really good.
This is a kid's game. This is for 3 years and over. I don't know what Ubisoft was thinking when they put this into a kid's game. We have slippery surfaces with these blue surfaces that force you to jump into these needles on the ceiling. And then we have these almost frame perfect jumps you have to somehow get. And even after all of that, this world ends in a boss fight that is just ridiculous. If you don't already know exactly what this boss is going to do in terms of attack patterns, you cannot react fast enough to actually dodge the attacks. Because for some of these you have to be prone and you have to be crawling over the floor. And if you don't already know what's going on, then you'll find that Rayman does not have enough movement speed to dodge these attacks. So you have to know exactly what the boss is gonna do before he's gonna do it. Trial and error. I can't say that the rest of the game was too difficult after that, because I basically had to replay the most difficult level in the game I don't know how many times. I gotten so good at the game that the rest of the game was kind of a breeze. Up until the very end, where I learned that to do the final mission, you had to collect all 6 cages on every level. When I learned that, I just quit and never touched the game again. Getting through each level was already painful enough, and I was not gonna actually go through all the levels again, farm up more lives, and explore them for cages. No, fuck that. I was not gonna do that. That's the last time I played Rayman 1 as a kid. So Rayman was out of the picture for a little while because I was just done with it. But then I got my PlayStation 2 with a copy of Rayman Revolution, which is essentially a Rayman 2 remaster, but this really was from a time when remasters were still good, because holy shit, after playing through Rayman 2 and then Rayman Revolution right after to, kind of put them against each other, there are so many differences. It's almost like an entirely new game that reused some of the Rayman 2 levels and improved upon a lot of the weak parts that Rayman 2 initially had. Did I say that combat was one-dimensional? Well, here you have dodging enemies with flamethrowers and area of effect attacks, enemies with rockets that follow you. Oh, and you can finally kill enemies with their own attacks, something that I found to be very lacking in Rayman 2. I actually tried this out before playing Rayman Revolution. There are also more interesting boss fights, and yes, there are a lot more robot pirates. You'll fight around 129 of them during a regular playthrough, not counting the 64 that sort of get thrown at you during this Space Invader type section of the game. Cages and lumps are also in more obscure places, and you actually have to go out of your way to search for them a lot more often. And cages don't give you your health back. Yes, they actually don't. Instead, with every 10 cages that you open up, you get to play a minigame when you're in the overworld, which we'll get to in a second as well. And after you beat the minigame, you get some extra health. It's essentially the same thing, but this fixes the part where you get all your health back over and over and over again every time that you open a cage. The levels also have a lot more to be explored, if you want to collect all the lumps, that is. Take this first plump part, for example, that I so hate on the Sanctuary of Rock and Lava. In Rayman 2, you just get a plump, you just proceed forward, right? Simple enough. In Rayman Revolution, you can backtrack the lava stream to an earlier part of the level to get into a hidden area, which then asks you to throw the plump on a rock sticking out of the floor. And that all leads to some more stuff you have to do to get to a hidden room with a cage and some lumps. Levels may also have huge areas to them that are either optional to go to, or that simply cannot be accessed until later in the game. The second level is a good example, because there are a few lumps here which you can only grab after learning how to grab onto purple lumps, which first time you play through this mission, you don't know it at that point yet. This mission also is a river that you can only get to by growing a plant, which you can only do after getting the rain mask from one of the Glowbox kits. And then there's this part where you can use the rain mask to grow shrooms and make yourself smaller to get to another hidden area. All of this on the second level, and you cannot get there on the first playthrough of it. The developers also changed the overworld into a hub world, which makes the world feel a lot more connected. You want to get to the Cave of Bad Dreams? Well, then you have to go through the Marshes of Awakening first. Want to get to the third mask? Well, it's protected by this fortress. You have to take down the 2 generators to get access to the fortress, and then from the fortress you can get to the Sanctuary of Fire and Lava. And that's where you find the 3rd mask. It's all sort of connected in this world, and I feel like that adds a lot to a game like Rayman 2, which already put so much emphasis on its world building. You can even see the blueprints for the final boss inside one of the headquarters. Is the game perfect? No, of course not. The hub world meant that there were also a lot more loading screens because, at this point, we're not really into the full-blown open world games yet. And the developers also sort of took the piss with a couple other things. Like, for example, when they decided to add in the boss to protect the 4th mask. You probably don't notice if you didn't play the game, but Rayman 2 had a boss for every mask, except for the 4th mask. The 4th mask was super easy to get to. It only took 2 levels as opposed to 4. And I already mentioned that I think that they rushed it because the levels were also kind of meh. But one of the Glowbox kids just gives the mask to you. And I guess the game faced criticism back when it released for not having a boss. So the developers with Rayman Revolution, they added in a boss for the 4th mask as well. And they could have done a lot of stuff with it, but they just basically copied the boss from the 1st and the 3rd mask and even named it Tornadus Recyclus because it's a recycled boss. It also has the most pathetic death animation in the game too. And then there's also the thing about the AI in this game. Both the enemy and the friendly AI, they leave a lot to be desired.
Must have been the wind.
Okay, now we go here because Glowbox needs to do his rain dance. Just jump over. Come here. Hello. Jump. Jump. Glowbox, you gonna jump? Alright, welcome back to you, I guess. Now you jump. That's how you do it. I mean, what? Glowbox, you gonna... Okay, now he goes there. Just do your... I should have let you fucking die.
So that's Rayman Revolution, and then Rayman 3 came out. And as you might have guessed it, I easily convinced my parents to also get me that game as well, because I was so excited to dive into the Rayman world once more and see what happened after the aftermath that was Rayman 2. And I wasn't disappointed with the game, but I guess it just didn't make as much of an impact as the second game did. In many ways, Rayman 3 was better than Rayman 2. For example, the combat had been made more interesting with left and right swings, in addition to the normal attacks, which, you know, you'd have to use to hit enemies from the side, and there was a thing to it, alright? Combat was more interesting. There was a lot more enemy variety as well, and enemies moved around a lot more. We have more interesting boss battles, which were not just the same boss with a reskin 3 times in a row. The lumps that you simply had to collect had been replaced by crystals with a point system and a combo meter, meaning that in every level you would end up with a score which you could always try to improve in multiple ways. The game looked better, the levels were bigger, and loaded with secret rooms, sometimes filled with Easter eggs or statues with characters from the previous game. Like, for example, this room. You might not see this at first sight, but if you look in the reflection on the floor, you'll see an extra window that isn't actually there. Well, that's not a mistake, that's actually a secret room. Just walk up to it and you'll find yourself some crystals. That's just one example. The reason that I don't think Rayman 3 is as good though is simply because of the presentation. Now I know, it's a kid's game with weird looking characters and all, but Rayman 3, opposite to Rayman 2, does not take itself seriously at all. It starts with the story itself. Instead of an invaded world that's on the brink of collapse, we have hoodlums now, which are red lumps that got spooked and therefore turned into black lumps, which are stealing weapons and turning themselves into hoodlums. And then there's Murphy, this flying thing, and he tries to be funny every other second in the opening level, which sometimes, you know, it works. you're kind of playing and you're getting a laugh out of it.
Hey, you wouldn't happen to be differently challenged, would you? There's a barrel that moves, a door that opens, and a switch. Any bright ideas?
Other times, though...
The force grows stronger in Andre. If you don't hurry, he's gonna start telling everyone he's your father.
Yeah, it just doesn't really work. I felt that the sarcastic comments can really ruin the game a bit. Now, luckily, this piece of shit vanishes after the first level, never to be seen again. But this type of attitude is seen back everywhere throughout the game. Basically, every character has that attitude. The main enemy, the leader of the Black Lumps, gets eaten by Glowbox, and the storyline is to find the teensy doctors that can get him out by performing music on his body. I know, it sounds very confusing, but it basically comes down to you having to escort the frog across the entire game to different doctors.
You were nicer in Rayman 2.
So the whole way through, whatever you're doing, you have Glowbox on your side doing very random stuff, even in the middle of fights. And Andre, the black lump that's actually inside of him, is constantly making these sarcastic comments.
You don't have any right to detain me against my will. I have rights. I want to see my lawyer.
Even the guys that you save from imprisonment say stuff like this.
I have to go drop the kids off at the pool.
Can be funny for a bit, but it gets old really, really fast. What I personally liked the most about Rayman 2 was exploring the more mysterious levels, closer to the masks. They had a certain atmosphere that, if you combine them with the soundtrack, it gave it a very memorable experience. Even though the boss fights in Rayman 2 weren't that complicated, they still had more of an impact because of the context. Rayman 3 just doesn't have the same magic. The abilities that you gain aren't age-old magical abilities. No, they're power-ups that you get from a can, like your Popeye with a big nose. And then, 3 years after that, in 2006, the franchise officially died for me when they released Rayman Raving Rabbids. In 2006, I was 11 years old, and I wasn't really aware that people talked about or covered video games online. I just wasn't as much into it or as much involved into games. I just really liked to play them. And when I saw a new Rayman game in the shop, I was like, yeah, sure, I'll buy it. I really enjoyed the other games. And that was a mistake. That was a very, very, very big mistake. The game starts off with this super low quality cutscene, Rayman being taken by some giant rabbits during his picnic, and then he gets thrown into an arena where you're then forced to play some mini games. I thought that this was a very odd start to the game, but I pushed through it. I played a couple mini games until I completed them all, and I was thrown into a cell and got a toilet plunger as a reward. Now it becomes obvious pretty fast that at the top of your cell there's a window, and if you can get enough toilet plungers, which means if you beat enough mini games, you'd be able to escape. And I was like, well, these mini games kind of suck, they're kind of gimmicky, but I can do a few more just to see where this is going, just to get out of the window. And it turns out you didn't need just a few, you needed 15 to get up there. And it also turns out that once you get out of the window, the game ends. That's the last time I ever bought a Rayman game. I guess looking back at it, it isn't such a sin to release a party game for a franchise that is doing pretty well. But we never got a proper Rayman 4, and instead we got another Rayman Raving Rabbids. Then a few years after that, Rayman Origins dropped, which went back to 2D platforming, but by that time, I was already so done with the franchise. I was already playing Halo, man. For this review though, I did play it a little bit. And yeah, it's not a bad game. The platforming is pretty tight. And if we only ever got Rayman 1, then this would have been the perfect sequel. Maybe it would still be a bit too silly, but if that's what they were going for, it's what they were going for. It is what it is. Thing is though, we didn't just have Rayman 1. We had Rayman 2 and Rayman 3 as well. And when Rayman 2 came out, it became more than just a platformer. It became a game about exploration. It became a game with a story, a cohesive world. Rayman 3 kind of went back on that a little bit, as I already explained in this video. And after that, all of that was completely dropped and done away with. I don't know, maybe I'm crazy for wanting a somewhat serious world for a character that looks like this, but I think it would be really cool for the franchise to return to a point like that, where we have some solid platforming, some solid combat mechanics, But we also have this cohesive world with stuff to explore and levels that are, you know, just as thematic and interesting as the levels that the second game had. But maybe that is just a nostalgia talking. Anyway guys, thank you so much for watching this long video about Rayman. Again, you know, I want to do some different stuff for the channel. I got a little bit tired of editing these Destiny videos, so expect me to experiment quite a bit with content in the following months. That's why feedback is appreciated, you know, let me know if you enjoyed this video or not. But yeah, as always, I'll see you all later, or like they say in the Netherlands, zie je later.